We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and our topic today is Earth has limited natural resource to continually support the generation of electricity. And with us, two famous guys. Let me show them. The first is Ronald Stein, Senior Policy Advisor for the Heartland Institute and CFACT, and co-author of the Pulitzer Prize-nominated book Clean Energy Exploitation. And great Cleveland Jones, Dr. Cleveland, researcher, member of the Science Advisory Board at NXT Energy, I suppose in Canada, advisor for geopolitics and in the energy industry. Guys, welcome, and this is me. Let me show that
yes.
I'm here too.
Nice to be with you, Kavai.
It's a pleasure to have you both here today again. Let me ask to Ronald, starting with a question that I always have for him, but sometimes I cannot understand very well. Let's see that this time he can explain better for me. Wind and solar are eternal source, are they? And oil and gas are eternal source. How do you see the time life of these energies?
Well, I'm pretty cautious about using the word energy because it's misunderstood. Usually they're referring to electricity because wind and solar is not wind and solar energy because wind and solar only generates electricity. They make no products. And the one thing about energy is people don't recognize that electricity came after oil. Let me repeat that. It came after oil because we have 6 ways to generate electricity. You got wind and solar, coal, natural gas, hydro, nuclear. All 6 ways of generating electricity cannot exist without oil because all the pieces and parts and components to make electricity are made from the oil derivatives manufactured from crude oil. The wire, the insulation, the computers.
But natural gas, Ronald, is used to generate electricity.
Natural gas is, but without the components, without the wires, the insulation, the computers, you're not going to make electricity.
Yeah, Ron, I think it's important to convey one message. You know, oil and gas as sources of the raw materials necessary for the petrochemical industry to convert those into many essential products throughout the economy are and will continue to be essential for a very long time. The question is how much is necessary to meet the demand for products as opposed to the demand for fuels for moving transportation and for generating
Logistics.
electricity. Yeah, so that is the question. And I think a while back, we thought, or the world was enamored with this transition thing and thought, well, if we transition, we don't need any more fossil fuels of any type. And now we recognize that we do and will continue to need fossil fuels for a long time for fuels and for conversion into products, plastics, this, that, and the other. Now, electricity, on the other hand, the demand for it is increasing and will increase dramatically. Even recently, we recognize that increase is much more than we had foreseen maybe 5 years ago before artificial intelligence and mining and data mining and all this came up.
Crypto mining, yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Data centers are being big power consumers.
Yeah. Good evening, Eduardo França. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
In the article that you wrote together, you mentioned that extracting minerals such as lithium and cobalt for renewable energy technologies would be non-ethical. Also, strongest statement, non-ethical.
I let Ron talk about that.
Yeah. Well, the book I wrote, Clean Energy Exploitations, which was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, talked about that because most of the exotic minerals and metals, the lithium, the cobalts, the manganese, is coming from developing countries that have minimal labor controls, minimal environmental controls. We're exploiting people that have yellow, brown, and black skin to mine for these materials. And the environmental degradation on their land is atrocious, but it's okay because the wealthy countries are going green. And that's the unethical part of it. Because
Hypocritical.
that, that's the question is, you know, you buy an EV, that's fine. It's a nice, clean driving car. You're not using any fuel.
Mm.
But what it took to put that battery in the car,
Yeah.
that's the question. Is it ethical to make
Yeah.
that battery? Because it takes a lot of lithium and cobalt.
No, yeah, but would it be ethical to explore and produce oil and gas, including CO2 emissions?
Well, Giovanni, the ethical question, I think, has been very correctly addressed by Ron. If you are talking about fossil fuels, for example, on the other hand, then you could argue that there are countries where there is maybe a concern about it being fossil fuels, oil and gas being produced in ways that are unsustainable, environmentally damaging, and even socially unacceptable. That pertains, for example, to some African countries and so on. But there's a big distinction because, this is for some countries a very small portion of oil and gas produced that can be said that of. But you could say, well, China produces some oil and gas, Russia produces a lot of oil and gas, Saudi Arabia, countries that don't have good freedoms and so on. But that doesn't make it unethical. It's just more of a geopolitical situation that has to be dealt with. Unethical is the way that mining is conducted in many African countries to extract the products, the minerals that we in the developed world demand. And that is indeed unsustainable. Now, it's unsustainable in the status quo, in the situation in which we live. There are some ways out for some products, but I think we have to look at it holistically. And in the wide spectrum of the critical minerals, the minerals that are very concentrated production in very few countries, that is going to be very difficult to change. We are looking in the future to changing, for example, lithium, including in the U.S. The shale patch could be one of the biggest lithium producers once we establish that technology.
But Cleveland and Ronald, in the beginning of oil production, we had leakage and some problems at the same way that we are having renewables now. So if we solve these questions about the country that are producing renewables, everything is okay with renewables. This is only the problem we have.
Well, the difference between renewables, which is the lithium and the cobalt, it's a very labor intensive to continuously get those materials out. Where oil and gas, once you dug the well, there might be a lot of environmental damage, but it's not labor intensive after it's dug. And you're basically just extracting it. And then it's not very labor intensive. But for every battery, the next battery is going to take the same amount of labor as the batteries, 10 weeks from now.
Ron, I think we also want to mention that, indeed, the oil and gas industry in the past was known for spills and accidents. They learned from those experiences. And I think over the long history of the oil and gas industry, we have seen tremendous improvement in operating procedures, especially in all the countries that we're dealing with. I would say maybe Russia has some exceptions, but even in the Middle East, oil and gas production is generally conducted according to significant environmental concerns and so on. And if you want to talk about social concerns, of course, the dividends or the wealth created, does it go to the people? Well, that's a separate story. It's any kind of wealth. Is it well distributed in the world or not? Now, in renewables, it can be very different because minerals mined in many of those countries are terrible situation in the mining, terrible situation of slave labor, unsafe conditions, and so on. There's no comparison, and then this brings to mind, for example, something that Ron talks about frequently. The nuclear industry with its power plants was maligned for a long time because of accidents. We're way beyond that. those things don't apply now. The industry has procedures in place that make future accidents virtually impossible. And of course, its operating history is excellent. Less deaths from nuclear accidents than any other energy source.
I'm being very provocative today, so sorry about
Okay.
that, but it's part of the game. And I agree with almost 100% that your both vision. But 8% of humanity lives with less than $10 a day, less, as Ronald says frequently. But this was a consequence of oil, not renewables, right?
It's not a
No,
consequence.
no.
No.
I mean, that's just part of, I guess, the world. I mean, the 80% of the world would like to live like us. The wealthy countries are very materialistic. We have, lots of hospitals and a lot of clean sanitation and running water and airports, and we got all the niceties that the 80% would like to have. But for some reason, yeah, I mean, I'm not an economist. I'm not sure why they're still living on less than $10 a day, but they would like to live the life we're leading.
Yeah, that is perfectly impossible, as many people know. We don't have 10 worlds, and that's probably what it would take to furnish the kind of living standards that Europe and the United States have for the rest of the world. That brings up a very important point: energy poverty, and this is something that the Switch Energy Alliance talks a lot about. Energy poverty is a major problem health-wise, social degradation, environmental problems due to energy poverty. And we can talk, for example, about Africa, which represents maybe over 1 billion or almost 1.5 billion people that live in energy poverty, meaning they're burning cow dung or elephant dung or whatever, or woods and sticks, because they don't have a forest anymore to cut down and burn. So they're cutting brushes and so on. That extreme energy poverty is unacceptable to the world in terms of providing living standards for populations. They need to have energy.
Being back to the title of your article and this podcast, so is there enough energy, enough resource to generate electricity? Are you saying that aren't they enough?
Well, the point we were making is when Earth has been around a few years, only about 4 billion years, and it's got a lot of natural resources, and we're extracting these natural resources, not replacing them, we're extracting them, and to our quote our benefit. Just take the case of oil. I mean, worldwide, the oil is extracting 35 billion barrels a year. Now, most people don't recognize what a barrel is, but if you put it in gallons, it's almost 1.5 trillion gallons of oil being sucked out of the earth.
5 trillion liters, if for our metric.
But who knows how much is left? Is it 100 years, 500 years, 5,000 years? We come up with new technology. We could frack and find more, but it's going to run out at some time. We're not going to be around then, but Earth is going to be around with or without us. And yeah, so it's interesting. And same thing with the lithium and the cobalt. I mean, most of that is basically surface materials, and some countries have it. President Trump is recognizing other countries have it. He wants to buy those countries to have access to those exotic minerals and metals. But the bottom line is, even in the United States, there's a lot of lithium here. The problem here in the United States is if you go for it, then you're going to be paying dearly. You're going to be paying labor rates are high. The environmentalists are going to be all over it. The expense is going to be huge. So the good news is there is a lot of lithium. The bad news is it's going to be very expensive lithium. So if you thought the EV batteries were expensive before, they're going to be more expensive.
More expensive. Cleveland, maybe this is the reason that Mr. Trump is imposing tariffs worldwide.
Yeah, another matter. but no, what Ron said is very important to understand. And this is maybe where we don't share a vision exactly the same. I have been on the record many times saying that oil and gas is not in short supply over the next 100 years. Now, I'm not talking about 1,000 years. Over the next 100 years, we have enough resources in the ground that are identified that we can produce, even economically at current prices and so on. The problem is making sure that at least the natural gas resource, for example, can indeed be used for generating electricity, as opposed to means that are clearly not sustainable, such as some of the renewable energies that are being proposed from sources that rely on unsustainable sources of natural resources. But Ron has been on the record as saying that, for example, nuclear power is one of the saviors. It uses very little proportionally natural resources. There are abundant natural resources, especially if you consider reuse of fuel with the new technologies available and so on. And indeed, we have to focus on the solutions, not the problem. The title is the problem. The problem exists if we insist on trying to generate electricity from sources that are not sustainable or not economical over a medium
Viable.
term. Yeah.
Good point.
But one more thing. Even if we have oil and gas for a long time, we of course have to plan on all of the above type of vision. We have to conduct basic research. Is fusion down the line something useful to produce electricity? Are biofuels able to be produced environmentally in a sustainable way without cutting down forests? That, I think, is one area where I, in particular, think that biofuels should be set aside as a different category that may be very useful down the line to produce biofuels in a sustainable way, such as some are produced in the U.S. Brazil is even more environmentally sustainable production, lower costs, and so on. This can be expanded.
Yeah, Ronald, Cleveland mentioned that in 100 years we could not have more oil or natural gas. So in this time, you suppose that we will have a replacement for this source? How do you see this?
Well, hopefully,
scenario?
we've had 200 years for oil. Oil didn't exist 200 years ago, and we've had 200 years to replace it. And I was recently interviewed on a New York TV station, and the first question to me was, "Hey, Ron, we understand you're pro-oil." I said, "Wait a minute, I'm not pro-oil. I'm pro the products we get from oil. And if we can get the products from another source, I am all for it." Because as Cleveland mentioned, be it 100 years, 500 years, we're going to run out at some point in time. We're not going to be around when we run out, but we really have to clone it because, like I say, we've got a lot of, hospitals and airports, and, take a look in the hospitals, the airports, in your office, your home, trying to identify something that was not made from the oil derivatives manufactured from oil. And if oil goes away at some point in time, how are we going to keep those products going?
Yeah, I think this is, Cavagna, I've mentioned before, technology is a solution. But as Ron said, these are very long cycles, 200 years to the present that we've lived with basically fossil fuels, and another maybe 100 or more, 200 years that we have to rethink how to substitute them. And that is possible if we promote nuclear and other sources enough to be able to apply synthesis of CO2 and other technologies to produce the feedstocks for the petrochemical industry. This is not going to happen in 10 or 20 years. Right now, we have bioplastics and so on, infinitesimal. It will take probably 50 years or more to be able to begin to see that.
Replace those things. But the point, Cleveland and Ronald, so the growing of electricity demand will be supplied by this new exploration of new resource? How can we fit this demand and supply of new sources?
Oh, that's they just extrapolate as if nothing controls the line. Obviously, we're going to hit a point where the line just can't go up anymore by cost, by availability, by geopolitics, and so on. And that is why the Earth really cannot support that kind of model to generate electricity. It can supply it with nuclear if it were to have a real renaissance. It can still supply it with natural gas and so on. And we have this window of opportunity. But certainly we cannot just keep going as we are, thinking that all solar and all wind will take care of it.
Ronald,
Another thing you have to think about is that
sure.
people don't recognize that everything that needs electricity is made from oil.
Yeah.
The iPad, the iPhone, the data centers, all the computers. I mean, they basically, all the components are made from the oil derivatives. So it's a combination of both. You need the oil to make the products, and then you need electricity to drive the products.
To run the products. But Ronald,
But Giovanni, I don't want to make the argument that there's no way out and this is the dire situation. Yeah. I think what we want to point out is that there's got to be another way, because this the path that we're on is not the path that will last very long. So we have to focus on other ways. And I have been on, for example, I believe that eventually natural hydrogen could provide some supply of a new source of energy. Natural hydrogen or hydrogen produced from oil wells and so on. That is way down the line. Just like synthesis of fossil fuels to use in biorefineries and so on. This is a technology necessity so that we can plan for 10, 20, 30, 50 years down the line.
Going to the policymakers in rich countries, and Ronald loves this thing. Are they concerned about poor countries? And the second question, they are talking totally different things one compared to other. How can the world solve these problems with this impossible understanding between them?
Well, that's why I write so many articles about energy literacy, because our policymakers do not understand that. And when you say, are they concerned about other countries? I would have to give the answer no, because, all we want to do is we're going to go wind and solar, everything wind and solar. And everybody's going to drive an EV. But the materials to go wind and solar and to go to EV batteries is coming from the countries that have no environmental controls, no labor controls. And they're not concerned about that because we're going green. So
I don't think we have to castigate them too much, because they will learn the hard way that this can't work, because we will hit that ceiling. The ceiling will be hit, even if we blindly continue to incentivize wind and solar and so on, because eventually, maybe 5-10 years from now, not that long, really, 5-10 years is not a lot of time. As we hit that ceiling, or as that ceiling becomes recognized as a limitation, then the realization will sink in and say, hey, we will have to look at something else. I think we're beginning to see that, at least in some research centers and so on, that are focusing on new nuclear and other energies that are not just unsustainable renewables. But the decision makers will take another 5 or 10 years to come to that realization, unfortunately.
Based on the title of the article and this podcast, are we going to have systematic shortage of electricity in the near future? Do you see this because the limitation of resource? Are we going to have?
I don't know what Ron's going to say. I don't think that is what we're pointing to. I think we're pointing that because that path that we're on is unsustainable, we will recognize that a little before we actually hit the wall. So yes, countries will come to the realization, just like companies are, they are refocusing on fossil fuels, as Shell and BP, even Equinor. And we discussed this some programs ago. Their actual reports now say, oh, we're focusing on oil and gas because they have to. Now, this is a realization that will prevent us from actually becoming energy short, even if we have to bring more people out of energy poverty, because, within 1 or 2 or 3 years, we can make a lot of changes. But those changes will be expensive. And in the meantime, we have to develop alternatives that really break this paradigm of, alternatives that are unsustainable and not enough fossil fuel emphasis and investment to keep our energy economies going.
Another point that Cleveland also talks about is we really have to focus on efficiencies improvement and conservation. Industry's done a great job. I mean, the vehicles today are much more efficient than they were in the 1900s. And yeah, and the iPhone is much more the power usage is low compared to the 2-ton phone you used to wear, and yeah, everything is getting more efficient, and that's what we got to focus on. Just because we have it, we don't want to waste it, and just to throw it away, because
Good point,
there's a
Ron.
lot of developing countries would like to have what we have, and we'd like to bring them out of poverty and have them join the industrial revolution and have a good life, and
Yeah,
life
the developed
expectancy.
Yeah, Ron, the developed countries will see this as a necessity, because the alternative is, if they really don't invest anything in these poor countries with energy poverty, they're going to have a tremendous problem with migration and upheavals and geopolitical conflicts and so on. So it's not just a moral dogma that says, oh, we can't have people living in poverty. They will be living in poverty until such point as the developed world recognizes that it is unsustainable from geopolitical risks to have them coexist with rich developed countries living using 100 times more energy than they are. And in this sense, like Ron said, yes, technology, efficiencies, even storage. And I'm not talking about Tesla packs. I'm talking about pumped storage that is multi-week, multi-month, seasonal, long-term storage. That is necessary, because most of the power generation that we have nowadays can address short-term interruptions, but we need longer than that. And then we can become much more efficient in using the energies that we have available. Now that will be an essential point. We discussed storage a while back. There's a lot of technological breakthroughs coming up.
Ronald and Cleveland, I have my last point for you both. Of course,
Okay.
you can bring more things here, but supposing that Mr. Trump asked Ronald to be the representative of this, and Mr. Lula asked Cleveland to talk and to bring recommendations for the limited natural resource for electricity. What each one of you could bring to us in terms of recommendation of this topic of the title of our podcast today?
Well, I know for the supply, as you know, Donald Trump is looking to buy other countries because they've got lithium and cobalt. If he's successful, I'm not sure if he'll put a tariff on those material when they come back to the United States. But the essence of the whole message is we have to continue to improve efficiencies in our conservation, because we're living a great life, and our children and grandchildren and et cetera, would like them to live the same kind of a life we're living, and we would like to bring the people, the 80% of the people living on $10 a day, into the industrial revolution. And to do that, they're going to be very materialistic to do that. And so we got what we got, and we want to have it last as long as we can.
Yeah.
And that's the focus.
Lula is waiting. Mr. Lula is waiting for your recommendations, Cleveland.
Yeah, if he were to follow my recommendations, I firmly believe that we could last a couple more or decades more, because I personally have been on the record that we have lots of oil and gas resources, and we have to develop them now as soon as possible in order to develop alternatives. We have to last out the next 50 years at least and not worry about the transition being so fast, but using our natural resources of oil and gas, especially the cleanest ones, the ones with the smallest footprint, and in a responsible way, in order to buy time until technology brings us more efficiency and alternatives such as nuclear and others that can take us further out. Without that, we are going to be stuck maybe only 30 years from now, but we don't want our children or grandchildren to suffer through that. So we have to buy that time, and this takes a long time because exploration and so on takes a long time. Yes, we know a lot of accumulations exist here, there, and that, but we need to buy time. We need time. And Lula, please, let's develop our pre-salt.
Ronald, any other comment after Cleveland speech? No.
He said it. Cleveland said it right on the nose.
Perfect. Guys, was a great pleasure to reference in the energy sector. Thank you so much to be in this podcast with us today.
Okay,
Fantastic.
thanks a lot.
Okay. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.